Hi, welcome to Tea and Tourneys. I'm Lisette, and today we're going to talk about specialty tournaments. I always start with the same slide, and that is making sure that you are planning and organizing and talking about the communication between the MOL and the marshal and any other relevant staff that might be involved in the event, especially with specialty tournaments, because this can be an all-encompassing event for a group, or this can be something much smaller. So communication and organization for specialty tournaments is very important. Okay. So plan and talk to the marshal in charge on how your tournament is going to be run. What are the specific rules? How will the rules be communicated to the participants? Is there a winner? How is that going to be determined? What determines the end of the tournament? All of those things have a lot of sway in whether that tournament is going to be successful or not. Now, specialty tournaments can be very elaborate and take months of planning and preparation, or they could be something very simple like a bear pit. So we're going to talk about all of these different types of tournaments, starting with the Grand Melee. We're going to talk a little bit about bear pits, although that is one that is fairly well known, along with Swiss 5, dice tourneys, ransoms, hunts, and paw to arms. Okay, so starting with the Grand Melee, historically this was a confused general hand-to-hand fight between large groups. And it would end when one person or group defeats everyone else or controls an objective at the end of a designated time period. Now, this could be single combat, or alliances can be formed during the Grand Melee. Now, with a Grand Melee, this is single loss and done. So once a fighter is defeated, they remove themselves from the field at their earliest convenience. Okay, now the Grand Melee can incorporate several different types of field adaptations. This could be an open field battle. This could contain bridges. It could be geared towards capture the gold or capture the flag or some other objective. This could incorporate castle or town battles, broken fields, or mazes. All of those are adaptations that can work in a Grand Melee type scenario. A bear pit tournament consists of a lone fighter holding the field until he or she are defeated. Now the tournament begins with two fighters facing each other in single combat. The remaining fighters form a line waiting to challenge the survivor on the outskirts of the field. Now, the winning fighter will remain on the field and faces the next challenger. The defeated fighter will report to the MOL with the winner's name so that the MOL can keep track of wins and losses. Fighters typically will receive 1 point for each victory, and the person with the most points at the end of the time period is the winner. Now, sometimes extra points are awarded for defeating fighters of a higher rank. For instance, a duke might be worth 4 points, a count 3 points, and so forth. Depending on the number of fighters and the time period allowed, 2 or more bear pits can be run simultaneously. Okay. Now, a variant of a bear pit is called a holmgang, and please excuse me if I've mispronounced that one. This comes from Norse, literally meaning to go to a small island. It referred to a trial by combat, used to settle legal disputes or to defend one's honor. A cloak or an ox hide was staked onto the ground, forming the combat arena or area, and the fighting was confined to this space. Now, each combatant would choose his or her own weapon, and the rules of combat varied by the location. Sometimes the fighters alternated blows, with the challenged fighter striking first. In other areas, it was a free-for-all. The rules for victory also varied from first blood to striking the cloak to the death. Since this was legal combat historically, there were no repercussions if an opponent was killed. Now, for our purposes, this can be fought within a confined space. Example, a 10-foot by 10-foot square. The fighter wins either by vanquishing their opponent or forcing him outside of the boundary. There must be an agreement as to what constitutes going outside of the boundary. For example, whether it's 1 foot on the line, 1 foot over the line, both feet over the line. Now, scoring is maintained in the same way as a regular bear pit, but marshals must maintain a more diligent control over this type. Because of the small confined space, there's a tendency for fighters to use their shields as leverage, and fights can quickly degenerate into shoving matches, especially on the rattan field. Now, these are great if the available fighting space is too small for other options. Now, pot arms became a prevalent tourney format in the late 14th to mid-15th centuries. One or more tenons or champions would announce that they would hold the field against all challengers at a set time and place. The challengers or venons would arrive at the site with their entourages, sometimes in costume. Edward III attended a pot arms dressed as the Pope with 12 cardinals in tow. Now, the tourney could last anywhere from a single day to an entire month. This was an opportunity for knights to demonstrate both their fighting prowess and generosity to their peers, since fighting ability and courtesy were considered equally important. In addition to providing weapons and armor to the challengers, the champions often provided extremely expensive gifts as a display of hospitality. Now, in the SCA, events featuring pot arms will often be heralded months in advance. The organizers will often recruit fighters to serve as the champions or defenders to hold the field against all other challengers. Fighters and attendees are encouraged to come in appropriate costume to add to the pageantry of the event. Now, scoring for this type of tournament depends on the event. In pot arms, demonstrations of courtesy and chivalry are as important as prowess in arms. The MOL may be asked to track wins and losses. Often a panel of populace or consorts will observe the fighting and judge the combatants on their chivalric virtues. Pots typically have 2 winners, one for prowess chosen by score, and one by virtue chosen by the opinion of the spectators. The MOL should discuss these matters with the event staff ahead of time. If a panel of judges is required, they should be recruited before the event. Now, a couple of themes to consider if you're planning a pot of arms. Typically, you have your champions and your challengers. These can take on various themes. Just some suggestions or things I've heard of being done in the past. You could do saints versus deadly sins, East versus West, England versus France, just like the cloth of gold, gods versus man for a Greek or Roman themed event. But all of these could work, or anything else where you've got a set of champion versus a set of challengers. Now, dice tourneys. In this tournament, a set of dice are rolled to determine weapons forms and limitations for each bout. This is easiest done for rapier or fencing tournaments, as there are only 2 rapier authorizations, epee and heavy rapier, not counting live steel or heavy schlaggers. Take 2 pieces of paper, number 1 to 6 on each piece, Besides the number on the first page, name the different weapons forms. On the second piece, you're going to create a list of limitations. For example, for our weapons forms for fencing, one to 6, we have duel, dagger and buckler, dagger and other, epee and cloak, epee and buckler, and dagger only. Limitations on our second options are draw cuts, 2 kills, 3 kills, a headshot only, arm shots only, or fought from the knees. Now, how this typically runs is we use 2 dice, or you can use the same dice and just roll it once and twice. I typically use 2 dice that are different colors, one for dice 1, one for dice 2. You can allow your participants to roll the dice, that way they are involved in this. For example, let's say that they both rolled a 6. So their fight or their bout is going to result in being fought with daggers only, and they both have to fight from their knees. So dice tourneys can be a lot of fun. They can incorporate a lot of fun scenarios or different skill sets and challenging scenarios for our fighters. So dice tourneys are one option for specialties. Now, Swiss 5, this tournament style is a variant on a round robin with 6 fighter groups. It's administered identically to a round robin, but the difference is that the fighters are forced to change weapon styles with each progressive fight. For example, again, this is one that's typically used in the rapier community. Each fighter has to alternate between single rapier, and soft pairing object like a cloak, single rapier and a hard pairing object like a scabbard or a buckler, rapier and dagger, and a rapier and a case. The sizes of each round robin group can be adjusted based on the number of weapon styles to be rotated through. For the rattan field, weapons rotations could include sword and shield, 2 swords, great sword, spear, or polearm. Now, separate authorizations are typically necessary for specific weapons types. A variance may be necessary, or an alternate weapons form may be used. Now, ransom tournaments are an attempt to recreate the melee tournaments of the 11th and 12th centuries. In period, the 3 principal reasons for attending a ransom tournament were war training for combatants, to make money by collecting ransoms, or to display one's prowess and distinguish oneself before peers. Now, these factors dictated the mood and tactics for the participants. Melees were hard-hitting, aggressive affairs, with fighters scrambling to capture prisoners and frequently scrambling to avoid being taken themselves. Combatants practiced their war maneuvers and took every opportunity to display their skill and courage before their fellow fighters. Everyone was aware that they were being observed, measured, and judged by their peers. For tournament winners were chosen by consensus. Now, each fighter is given a starting stake in tokens of some form, could be coins, beads, whatever you can come up with. These will be maintained by the MOL upon a board of squares or spread out cards large enough to contain those tokens. Now, participants are going to lose tokens when they have been subdued and must pay their own ransom. They can gain tokens by defeating others and collecting ransoms. And depending on how you've set up your tournament or your event, participants can gain tokens from the populace and patrons. Now, if a participant runs out of tokens, an appeal to patrons and the populace can be made, typically in the form of performing some service or act and receiving token payments to continue fighting in the melee. Now, MOLs will record the initial stake given to each fighter, and then by tick marks or other methods recording how those tokens are distributed, whether they have been paid out or whether they have gained tokens, so that a running total for each fighter. Now, this could take up a lot of MOL space, so several tables might be necessary. The tokens that are on each one of the cards just represent the available amount that that fighter has. Now, once a fighter is subdued and pays his ransom, he does have to sit out for 2 minutes, and then he can go back to the field, kind of like a resurrection point. Now, if you're doing a ranked ransom tournament, the rank of the participant will determine their initial stake in terms of tokens and what they would have to pay should they be subdued. Okay, so you can see here on this chart, we've got a king, a prince, a duke, counts and earls, knights and MODs, squires, man-at-arms, unbelted participants, or novice. Each are given an initial stake based on that ranking. And then also the ransom amount for being defeated is also coordinated with their rank as well. Now, ransoms are not cumulative. A loser will only pay one ransom for the highest rank that they have attained. For example, a defeated duke and a knight only pays the duke's ransom. If a fighter cannot cover the ransom, they must acquire more before returning to the field, acquire more tokens. Okay, these could be purchased at a reasonable rate, such as 5 tokens for $1. Patrons may also provide tokens to sponsor a fighter, as sponsoring a fighter was a common period pastime. Now, for our purposes, these extra tokens might be provided at Troll or purchased at a slightly reduced rate than what the fighter can do for himself, such as 8 for $1. A generous combatant may pay another's ransom from their personal stake, or even act as a patron to another fighter. Now, if fighters cannot raise a stake to cover their ransom, they may hire out to anyone willing to pay for them if they are captured. Now, this could be used as a fundraiser for the kingdom or the barony or the group, or for a travel fund, anything like that. So that might be something to consider as well. Other ways are available to expend tokens, such as hiring a retainer or a herald to extol the feats of prowess and tell the crowd how wonderful a fighter is. Think A Knight's Tale, if you've watched that movie from years ago. A few lively heralds can really enhance the atmosphere of this type of tournament. The idea is to be creative and have fun. Medieval nobility spent money hand over fist to impress their peers. We want to encourage everyone here to do the same. Okay, fighters may go out as individual combatants or small teams. Large teams should be discouraged. However, there should be no limit on how many teams may temporarily combine. Try to encourage temporary alliances, and then no single power block will dominate. If a single group becomes too dominant, the marshals are encouraged to break up the team to allow for more equitable power sharing on the field. If individual challenges are issued and met, the two combatants should not be interfered with. Optional rule to consider are body thrusts as killing blows or face thrusts. Since the fighters are trying to capture their opponents and hold them for ransom, body and face thrusts should be discouraged. Dead fighters pay no ransom, but sit out for whatever interval has been established before returning to the field. Now, the champion of the tournament is chosen by consensus of a judges panel. Honorable conduct, comportment on the field, selflessness, heroic action, and a panache have been used by criteria in previous ransoms. The idea of this tournament style is to see who succeeds best at representing the spirit of the day, though the most successful gatherer of ransoms is also usually acknowledged. Now, William Marshall tournaments are a bit easier version of ransom, especially for the MOLs. Each fighter is just given 5 coins or tokens at the beginning of the tourney for their ransom, regardless of their societal rank. The fighting can be either to incapacitate, such as with a regular ransom tourney, or to the death. That's up to whoever's running. With each loss, the losing combatant must give up a coin to the winning fighter. As long as a fighter still has coins, they can continue to compete. When they are out of coins, they are eliminated from the tournament. Fighter with the most coins at the end of the time period is declared the winner. Because the number of combatants will dwindle as losing fighters are eliminated, this can result in a highly competitive finish amongst the survivors. Now, appeals to the populace for coins may be used in a William Marshall tournament, but only for the first half of the designated time period. And that allows for that more exciting finish at the end. Now, hunts take a lot of planning ahead of time. They're going to take a lot of support, as you're going to need several fighters to act as animals on the hunt. And then you're going to have all of your challengers form your hunt teams. Time's going to be necessary if the event and the fighters go the extra mile for costumes. This can also be a popular variation for woods battles or maze fightings. Now, the animals that you use are going to typically have special abilities and restrictions on how they can be vanquished. For instance, a boar may only be killed by thrusting blows. A lioness is invulnerable until her cubs are killed. A turtle has an invulnerable shell and can be only killed by a head blow. Now, your marshal in charge or your event staff is going to recruit the fighters to take on the roles of the animals. They're also going to brief all of the combatants on the rules before the hunt actually begins. When a team defeats an animal, the animal will give them a token signifying that they won. Each animal must have a distinctive token, since the different types of animals are worth a different number of points. Now, the hunt will last for a specific amount of time, and then at the end of the time period, the hunting teams will report back to the MOL with their tokens for a final tally mark. Okay. So just as an example, some hunted characters and their point values: a bear, a boar, a dragon, stag, turtle, unicorn, lion, wolf, a lioness with 2 cubs. Almost any type of animal or mythical being or creature can be used. Hunts run more smoothly with advanced preparation. That way, the animals have time to make themselves tabards or costumes reflective of their hunt persona. Tokens can also be made at leisure instead of scrounging the week before an event or practice. And the MOL will know in advance what the rules and the points are for each hunted animal and can help answer questions and brief the fighters. Now, special conditions for any type of tournament, and some tournaments that they could be used in, these can be added in just to give an extra amount of challenge for your tournament or your practice. You could use a wounds retained condition in bear pits. So if a combatant has lost an arm or a leg, then that would be retained as they continue through the bear pit until they lose, and then it resets. Resurrection points can be used in melees. You can use limited blows. You could use restricted weapons forms or restricted target areas. And there could be special immunities to damage, such as with your hunts. There could also be movement restrictions, as we saw with the variation on a bear pit. Okay, so that was an example of a lot of different specialty tournaments or conditions to add different flavors to your events or practices. If I have not explained anything very well, or you're confused or have some questions, by all means, send me an email. Both of my emails are listed there, or catch me at an event in the future. Have a good day.